You seem to disapprove of Bush's response to 9/11. Given the immensity of the losses that the United States had sustained, could he have acted any differently?
A good question. My answer, no, he probably couldn't, but he should have anyway.
I don't get it.
What I mean is this. Bush was not a creative or original thinker. He became president when smug post-Cold War assumptions of American global preeminence ran rampant. He accepted those assumptions at face value. Americans' destiny as the ever-enduring sole superpower seemed self-evident to Bush and to those around him. The inevitable triumph of American-style liberal democratic capitalism across the globe was likewise taken for granted. This was arrant nonsense, of course, but in policy circles, it had become dogma. It never occurred to Bush to question such propositions. Now, the smoldering ruin of the Twin Towers and the gaping hole in the side of the Pentagon had demolished such tripe.
So, what replaced it?
In a sense, more of the same. For President Bush, who after a misspent youth had become devoutly and genuinely religious, this meant a sudden conversion experience to the secular church known as Wilsonianism.
Wilsonianism?
A reference to Woodrow Wilson and his conviction that God, or Providence, summons America to save humankind by remaking the world in its own image. Prior to 9/11, Bush dismissed such claims as absurd. After 9/11, he fervently embraced them.
Did the Vulcans share Bush's conversion experience?
Bush's advisors didn't share his personal religiosity, but they did share his belief in the need for the United States to assert itself. And they certainly shared Bush's faith in American military power. Rumsfeld and Vice President Dick Cheney believed that the best way to avert any recurrence of 9/11 was to ensure unchallengeable U.S. dominion, impose America's will on those who threatened American primacy. Paul Wolfowitz, now wielding influence as Deputy Secretary of Defense, represented a somewhat different but allied camp. He thought that the key was to democratize the Islamic world. Doing so, he felt certain, would dry up the sources of anti-Americanism that fueled terrorism. So instead of dominion, he advocated liberation. Where these analyses converged was on a course of action. U.S. military activity in the various quarters of the Islamic world was going to kick into high gear. The Bush administration dubbed the ensuing enterprise the Global War on Terrorism. The name was convenient, but misleading. Imagine calling the conflict between North and South in the 1860s the American War Against Secession. Sort of dodges the main issue.
What would have been a more accurate name?
Well, look at your syllabus. The War for the Greater Middle East. Of course, the premise of this course is that the War for the Greater Middle East had actually begun way back in 1980, even if presidents since Jimmy Carter hadn't fully fessed up to the fact. What happened in 2001 is that U.S. authorities now candidly owned up to the war's existence, without, however, owning up to the actual purpose of the enterprise. Instead, they camouflaged their purposes by styling the war as intended to eliminate terrorism. But this makes about as much sense as saying that you're waging war on drugs or on illegal immigration. War as such isn't going to solve the problem. Ostensibly waging war against terrorism, the Bush administration was actually waging war in pursuit of U.S. hegemony. Like Rumsfeld said, the idea was to make them change so that we wouldn't have to.
But regardless of the name, was there a plausible alternative to the U.S. response being primarily military? Could the United States have taken a different path than the one it followed after 9/11?
Arguably, yes, but doing so would have required three things from Bush and those in his inner circle. First, a more nuanced view of history, particularly the history of the West's involvement in the Islamic world over the previous century, very much at odds with the American preference for seeing things in black and white terms. Second, a more realistic appraisal of the immediate threat, which was real enough, but hardly deserved comparison with Hitler's Germany or Stalin's Soviet Union. And third, an appreciation for the limits of American military power, already glimpsed at Beirut in 1983 and in Mogadishu in 1993. Of course, the prevailing temper after 9/11 did not encourage any actual thinking. If anything, the nation's mood discouraged serious reflection, especially in Washington, which was badly, and perhaps understandably, spooked. So the overwhelming impulse was to avenge.
But go back to your lecture and the clip where President Bush says that bin Laden wanted to overthrow all Arab regimes friendly to the United States and purge the region of Christians and Jews. Wasn't that accurate? Isn't that what bin Laden said he intended to do?
Bush's statement accurately described bin Laden's intentions. But how about his capabilities? Maybe I'd like to quarterback the New England Patriots. Should Tom Brady worry about losing his job?
That's a silly comparison. Bin Laden posed a real threat. 9/11 proves that.
How did 9/11 happen?
What do you mean?
I mean, how were 19 young men armed with box cutters able to hijack 4 commercial airliners and kill several thousand innocent people? How did they succeed? Was it because they were so smart? Were these guys the equivalent of SEAL Team 6? Or did they succeed because the U.S. government agencies responsible for domestic security were so careless?
9/11 wasn't a one-off event. It formed part of a much larger campaign, a jihad against the United States and against Israel and against Arab regimes that collaborated with the United States.
True. But what exactly was bin Laden selling? A chance for Muslims worldwide to renew some golden age several hundred years in the past? Is that what young Egyptians or young Iranians or young Pakistanis yearn for?
I don't know.
Well, perhaps some do. Arguably, most don't. Most want a piece of what modernity has to offer. But by exaggerating the actual threat that bin Laden posed, we actually played into his hands. For bin Laden, Bush's war on terrorism was a gift from the heavens. He wanted U.S. troops to invade and occupy countries in the Islamic world. Our doing so would demonstrate the accuracy of his own analysis. By declaring war on terror and using that as a rationale for killing Muslims, we became al-Qaeda's best recruiting tool.
What was the alternative?
Instead of assault, seduction. Rebut the charges that Islamists like bin Laden were laying at our doorstep. Demonstrate through action that liberal values are not incompatible with religious belief. Show that Western attitudes towards sex do not necessarily demean women. Give the lie to the charge that Americans are inherently materialistic, that all we care about is getting more stuff. In short, live up to the ideals we profess. Demonstrate that those ideals are worth emulating. And in the meantime, erect effective defenses to protect Americans from further assault by violent Islamist radicals.
But wouldn't that approach take time?
What's the hurry? Besides, is it your impression that relying on military means to bring change produces quick results? Where's the evidence for that? Here's the key point. The architects of America's war for the Greater Middle East have always assumed that the United States has the capacity to determine the future of the Islamic world in part or in whole. After 9/11, the Bush administration made that assumption explicit. But events have never supported this assumption. Indeed, time and again, they've shown it to be false. Ultimately, the people of the Islamic world will exercise their right to self-determination. This is what policymakers in Washington have refused to accept. Now, the process may be messy, and it may take a while to resolve itself, but they will decide their future for themselves. They will devise their own formula for reconciling religion and culture with the requirements of modernity. The most that the West and the United States can do is to offer hints. In that regard, we are better off serving as an exemplar of a humane and equitable society than trying vainly to impose our values at the point of a bayonet.
I'm not sure that I'd classify our system in its current form as genuinely humane and equitable. I mean, we've got our problems.
Yes, indeed.
To go back to that Rumsfeld quote you like, you seem to be suggesting that instead of changing their way of life, we should concentrate on changing our own, that fixing what's broken within provides a proper foundation for strategy.
Precisely. I think you just might pass this course yet.